interesting article about landback and communism. Particularly, we have a lot of, so-called communists online. People identify as being on the left, having very, very frankly reactionary and disgusting and chauvinistic views about this. And then when these people have debates about this, it's everybody who's, shitting on the idea. I'm thinking of Peter Coffin and how he had uh, this panel, but everybody was, shitting on the idea of it, including uh, himself, Caleb Maupin, etc. It's like that's not really what type of learning or new understanding are people going to be able to get from that. Obviously, not much of any when everybody agrees on the topic. So I found this article really interesting. It's a pretty long read, so it might take a while, but here it is. It's why communists should care about land back and LGBTQ plus liberation, ending white supremacy, disability rights, etc. by the American Johnson. Important note, this article comes to us via my wife and comrade, Luna Nguyen. Apologize if I'm mispronouncing the last name. With editing and a few small contributions from myself. Luna is a Vietnamese. She has a great YouTube channel, Luna Oi. Maybe I'll link that in the comments. Luna is a Vietnamese woman who has a YouTube channel in Vietnam, which you should check out. Agreed. Article is written from Luna's first-person perspective because much of the info is personalized to her own background and draws from her experience as a Vietnamese communist woman as a victim of colonialism. I do find it very frankly problematic when people identify as being on the left or, socialist or communist, and they want to uphold the American flag as, some, great symbol or something, when especially to people outside of the United States, not to mention all of the people in the United States who see it as a sign of horror and genocide and colonial conquest and plunder. But think about how people in the global South feel when they see somebody, draped in the American flag, or somebody talking about the American flag as some, great symbol. Like, isn't socialism supposed to be, internationalism? Right? Isn't that kind of important aspect of it? How do you think, again, people in Vietnam think? Like, they're not going to view you as a fucking comrade when you come draped in an American flag. People in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, people in Latin America with all the, coups the U.S. has orchestrated and supported there. People in Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's just very problematic, frankly, when people on the left want to identify as American patriots or talk about how great the American flag is. Like, no, get the fuck out of here with that. Anytime I talk about secondary contradictions of class society, land back and indigenous liberation, dismantling patriarchy, trans rights, dismantling whiteness, etc., hear the same objections over and over again. These objections tend to stem from one of three core problems: a misunderstanding of scientific socialism, the philosophy of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, based on the methodology and worldview of dialectical materialism, misunderstanding of what liberation movements and ideologies exist to address the secondary contradictions in question, the LGBTQ plus movement, land back / indigenous liberation, anti-racism, etc. Both of the above. So let's try to clear things up and explain how anti-capitalism and other forms of counter-oppression aren't simply compatible with each other. They are dialectically linked with one another, and understanding this linkage is vital for moving the global working class forward toward our goal of a classless, stateless society, which again, that would be communism realized, right? A classless and stateless society. First, let's address three most common responses I receive from socialists when I talk about forms of oppression that aren't capitalism. Objection 1, these are all distractions. You're dividing the working class. Ignore this id poll and focus on class. That is something that people like Caleb Maupin will often say, like, this is a distraction, like you're dividing us, this isn't really going to get us towards socialism, right? That's what a lot of these people would say. So point well taken, Luna. First, any discussion of identity is identity politics. True. There are many versions of IDPO. I'll be the first to admit that liberal IDPO is harmful, 100%, not just to our communist movement, but also to the people who are being negatively impacted by such forms of oppression. Liberal identity politics tend to reduce and essentialize issues of identity to metaphysical, static, isolated categories. These metaphysically distinct categories of human beings are then pitted against each other to compete with each other for resources and attention within the system through the phenomenon of oppression Olympics, or makes me think of, like, woke, kind of woke imperialism, right? How the I saw it was, I think the Marines are posting this soldier is now able to this Hindu soldier is now, or the Sikh soldiers now were able to wear their head covering thing. Like, well, that's so awesome. Of course, all these competitive theaters between ostensibly divided groups never acknowledge the role capitalism plays both in reinforcing and being reinforced by all these other forms of oppression. I would also like to note that insisting that we never discuss identity politics is in itself another form of identity politics. Just as I'm sure any communist would agree, insisting that we never discuss or address class is a form of class politics. Erasing and suppressing discussions of identity-related forms of oppression is itself a form of identity politics. So given that no matter what, we will be engaging in identity politics, we as communists must find a form of identity politics which best suits our revolutionary morality and goals. Agreed. We must also understand the history of different forms of identity, oppression, and capitalism. Colonialism, for instance, stems from a brutal intersection between race and capitalism. Slavery was also an important vector of intersection between capitalism and race. The ways in which women have been exploited and our labor stolen by the patriarchy relates heavily to capitalism, yes. Suppression of the proletariat has hinged upon both the domestic exploitation of women in households and the division between men and women in the workplace has carried a critical aspect of the divide and conquer strategy of the bourgeoisie all over the world. Thus, class oppression is intertwined and reinforced by countless other forms of oppression. To even begin conceiving of how to unravel this monstrous tangle of contradictions, we have to find a starting point, a primary basis upon which all further investigations and practice can be built. Ho Chi Minh, the great Vietnamese revolutionary that he was, rest in power, comrade, wrote extensively to define a revolutionary conception of morality which is compatible with scientific socialism to be used as a first basis of inquiry and action. Ho Chi Minh's model of revolutionary morality was rooted in one foundational charge: the determination to civilize and liberate human race from being oppressed and exploited. I mean, hard to argue with that, right? This is the foundation of all Marxist morality. My husband and I have a 3-part video on Marxist morality, which you can watch here, based on the excellent book Ethics and Progress by Howard Selsom, which you can read here for free. But to put it briefly, the Marxist viewpoint is rooted in the liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression. Yes. Marx and Engels properly identified economic class as the primary contradiction, human society, but they also firmly recognized that society was divided in many ways. Yes, that's a good point, right? Just because we get rid of, capitalism, which we obviously need to do to forms of oppression, just simply, vanish with it. Like, we'd also have to work on, ending these other contradictions, right? While they certainly regard a unified working class as instrumental to overthrowing class society, they knew that unification was merely potential and not the current state of human society. A few relevant excerpts. This is from The German Ideology by Marx. Competition separates individuals from one another, not only the bourgeoisie, but still more the workers, in spite of the fact that it brings them together. Hence, it is a long time before these individuals can unite. apart from the fact that for the purpose of this union, if it is not to be merely local, the necessary means the great industrial cities and cheap and quick communications have first to be produced by big industry. Hence, every organized power standing over against these isolated individuals who live in relationship daily, reproducing this isolation, can only be overcome after long struggle. To demand the opposite would be tantamount to demanding that competition should not exist in the definite epoch of history, or that the individual should banish from their minds relationships over which, in their isolation, they have no control. In other words, the working class is defined by a complex set of internal, external dialectical relationships with other forms and manifestations of oppression. 100%. Agreed. Marx wanted to see the contradiction which divided the working class negated, but he also realized that such negation could only come from long and arduous struggle in the material world. I'll stay hydrated here. Some nice local spring water. It would be absurd to simply pretend as if the working class were already united when in materiality it is very clearly fractured and divided. And I think that is definitely true, particularly in the context of the United States, right? Simply ignoring the nature and role of these divisions will only severely delay the unification of the working class and misguide the working people into deeper false consciousness and idealist utopian positions that we can overcome bigotry and division simply by adjusting our mindset or consciously rising above racism and other forms of oppression. Yep. That's why I was saying, just because we get rid of capitalism and have a dictatorship of the proletariat where we have a socialist society and economic mode of production doesn't mean these other forms of oppression would automatically go away with that. That's going to take more struggle and work to work out those other forms of contradiction. I say that these positions are utopian because they represent a worldview that fixates purely on abstract ideas that simply present a vision and a distant goal of an ethically just society detached from material conditions and realities. One of the core principles of scientific socialism is that social problems must be objectively understood and attacked through material practice. Yes, like Lenin said, concrete analysis of the concrete conditions. Don't be dogmatic. Don't look at the world from where you want it to be or where it was 20 or 50 years ago. Look at the world, how it exists currently. Super, super important. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skin signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. The idyllic proceedings are the chief momentum of primitive accumulation. These methods that depend in part on a brute force, e.g., the colonial system, but they all employ the power of the state, the concentrated and organized force of society to hasten, hothouse fashion, the process of transformation, the field and mode of production into the capitalist mode, and to shorten the, what's that cat back there, the transition. I remember this part, force is the midwife of every old society pregnant with a new one. Again, that's why, dictatorship of the proletariat, like wouldn't be just willy-nilly, let's let all the counter revolutionaries with their internal external overthrow this new socialist government, right? Like that's be kind of silly, kind of stupid, not analyzing material conditions, right? It is itself an economic power. Whilst the cotton industry introduced child slavery in England, it gave in the United States a stimulus to the transformation of the earlier, more or less patriarchal slavery into a system of commercial exploitation. In fact, the veiled slavery of the wage workers in Europe needed for its pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World. If money, according to Augier, comes into the world with a congenital blood stain on one check, capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. Wow. Marx, like, he just had a way with words, right? Let's read that last sentence again. Capital comes dripping from head to foot from every pore with blood and dirt. And if you actually look at how capitalism operates, capital operates, I don't know how you could argue any other way, right? In the above passage, Marx recognizes the ways in which capitalism fuses, reinforces, and is reinforced by other forms of oppression, like yeah, patriarchy, racism, oppression of LGBTQ plus folks, oppression of people with disabilities, etc. Chattel slavery in the United States of America was decidedly not a capitalist mode of production, as enslaved people received no wages, but the demand for raw cotton material in the textile mills in England created such demands for cotton that chattel slavery was necessary to meet the market demands. In this manner, capitalism worsened the conditions, expanding the practice of chattel slavery. While chattel slavery reinforced capitalism and led to other social problems in faraway lands, such as child slavery in English textile mills and other industries. Marx wrote in Letter to Engels, 1869, as to the Irish question, the way I shall put forward the matter next Tuesday is this, that quite apart from all phrases about international and humane justice for Ireland, which would be taken for granted in the International Council, it is the direct and absolute interest of the English working class to get rid of their present connection with Ireland. And this is my most complete conviction, and for a reason which in part I cannot tell the English workers themselves. For a long time, I believed that it would be possible to overthrow the Irish regime by English working class ascendancy. I always expressed this point of view in the New York Tribune. Deeper studies now convince me of the opposite. The English working class will never accomplish anything before it has gotten rid of Ireland. The lever must be applied in Ireland. This is why the Irish question is so important for the social movement in general. And you see, Marx being able to change his thinking when he's able to analyze the concrete conditions in this question, in this case about Ireland. That's why it's so important to be able to take new information, new points of view, analyze what's actually happening on the ground, and be able to adopt that to your thinking and outlook. And I feel like that is one of the things that these proletarian patriots or these patriotic socialists, these communists, these particularly white communists who think the American flag is, something to be upheld, or how, landback is somehow, anti-communist. They really need to actually engage in some self-criticism like Mao talked about. But it seems like people like, was it Haas Infrared or something like that absolute hack, or Caleb Maupin or Jackson Hinkle or Peter Coffin, they aren't able to engage in that self-criticism, and it's just they just have a echo chamber around them of people that are just telling them, yeah, you're right, not calling them out at all, right? Clearly, Marx was very aware that the colonization of Ireland was harmful to both Irish workers and to English workers as well, and that before there could be any hope of dismantling capitalism in England, the colonial subjugation of the nation of Ireland had to be first negated. Ireland had to be decolonized. Yeah, so these people claim, to be, Marxist-Leninists and American patriots, but they're actually, what they're espouting goes against Marxist-Leninist thought and worldview. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Ireland had to be decolonized. Ireland needed autonomy, self-determination to have their land restored. Otherwise, English workers would, in Marx's own words, with Marx's own emphasis, never accomplish anything. This blows away the argument commonly held by class reductionists that Marx believed that we need to overthrow capitalism before we can address other forms of oppression. Marx very clearly believed that the secondary contradiction of the colonization of Ireland need to be addressed before capitalism can be tackled in both Ireland and the UK. Positions like these are extremely common in the works of Marx and Engels and have been expanded on and developed by countless Marxists since. Marxist revolutionaries have been aware of and seeking to understand the dialectical relations between capitalism and other forms of oppression going back to the beginning, because Marxism is a project of liberating all human beings from all forms of oppression. Yes, 100%. Shout that from the fucking rooftops. Which brings us back to Ho Chi Minh's revolutionary morality and the next characteristic which Ho Chi Minh ascribes to morality. Revolutionists must clearly understand good things and bad things. And something that Mao talked about in his, little red book was the ability to be able to differentiate your friends from your enemies. Uncle Ho taught us that it's important to understand the difference between right and wrong. Going back to the foundation of Ho Chi Minh's revolutionary morality, good is defined as that which furthers the cause of liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression, while bad is defined as that which hinders the cause of liberation of all humanity from all forms of oppression. So, these quote unquote, communists, particularly white ones, it seems, who are talking shit about landback or spouting this nonsense about being an American patriot and also being a Marxist-Leninist and anti-imperialist, like they would be bad in this example because they're for upholding this form of oppression. They're against this, liberatory work that needs to happen, right? In Marxist morality, good actions and bad actions are defined by the material conditions. Bourgeoisie moralists often ponder whether the ends justify the means and try to construct metaphysical branches of moral categories to try to determine universal answers to moral quandaries. But revolutionary morality instead asks the question, do the material conditions justify the means? Focusing on the ends make no sense from a scientific socialist point of view for two reasons. We have no way of knowing what the ends will be. The ends might have unforeseen consequences or may manifest in unexpected ways. It's true. Ends and means have dialectical nature. Whatever end results from any action become the material conditions for future means. The material conditions we exist in now are the ends of countless prior struggles and human activities. Therefore, when contemplating the moral question of what we should do, we should not focus on the ends and other hypotheticals, but on the material conditions which exist in time and place that we currently occupy. And again, that is a very Marxist-Leninist outlook, what Luna just said there. We must have a vision for what we hope to accomplish with our actions, yes, but this must be a concrete vision which is grounded in our material reality, with a material sense of how we can get from where we are to where we want to go. This becomes particularly relevant because utopian class reductionists like to throw monkey wrenches into liberation discourse by asking inane questions like this. So this is the type of shit that Caleb Maupin often spouts, and wanted to possibly have him on the channel at some point in the past, but after I've seen his ridiculous shit on this, like I don't want to be platforming somebody like that, frankly. How are you going to give all the land back to indigenous people? What do you want? Kick all the white people out of the USA? You can't completely abolish whiteness. That will never happen. It's an unrealistic goal. It will take decades to fully liberate LGBTQ plus people who don't have that long. We have to end capitalism now. These kinds of idealistic distractions which focus on hypothetical end states instead of the current material conditions, ongoing struggles, and existing dialectical relations between capitalism and other forms of oppression distract from the real material conditions. Again, that's why when people say that, when people throw all these canards about, land back or being American patriots or whatever, they're actually, when they claim to be, Marxist Leninists, they're actually, doing the complete opposite of using a, Marxist Marxist-Leninist worldview and, analysis, right? Let's see. Skipping ahead to matters of the endgame forces oppressed people to engage in drawn-out hypothetical discourse about how we might completely eradicate this or that form of oppression instead of focusing on what can be done right now to weaken these secondary contradictions and, by extension, capitalism. I'm just going to be eating a little Asian pear breakfast. These are Chojuro, Asian pears, homegrown, super good. Food not lawns, fruit trees are amazing. If you're able to plant some, please do it, even if it's guerrilla gardening, right? We're expected to drop everything and focus on answers to hypothetical questions you can't possibly know because the material conditions just haven't developed enough for having any basis for discussing, not disgusting, endgame strategy. So clearly distinguishing between good and bad means focusing on what can be done in here and now to alleviate the suffering and weaken the oppression of all human beings from all forms of oppression. Excuse me. Fixating on irrelevant and distant hypotheticals and couching oppressed people as mere distractions, therefore, is clearly bad. Yes, 100%. That's why when, so-called communists or Marxist-Leninists act in the way she's describing, they are being clearly bad, right? From Ho Chi Minh's discussion, because they aren't working to, liberate and end these forms of oppression. Focusing on concrete steps which can be taken in the real world right now, right here, right now, to alleviate the suffering of people is good. Now let's move on to Ho Chi Minh's next characteristic of revolutionary morality: maintaining political standpoint. A common criticism which utopian class reductionists throw around is that we are not being Marxist, which, again, in seeking to negate secondary contradictions within the working class, I've already shown Marx is very aware that the working class is not yet united, and knew that before capitalist class could be overthrown, it's vital that we negate secondary contradictions which keep the working class divided. So good. Been eating from this tree solid probably 3 weeks, and there's still some fruit on it. Last time I was there, it's a small sampling of the Asian pears. I probably got one tree alone 35 to 50 pounds of fruit. So amazing. Food not lawns, food not bombs. In Vietnamese dialectical materialism, the standpoint or viewpoint is a starting point of analysis which determines the direction of thinking from which phenomenon problems are considered. Scientific socialism, a methodological philosophy developed by Marx and Engels, is a series of socio-political economic theories intended to build socialism based on a foundation of science as well as society's material conditions. While it's absolutely true that the economic class antagonisms have developed under capitalism into only two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or the working class and the capitalist class, it's also undeniable that the working class itself does not exist in monistic unity. It's not a single and invisible entity in its own right, 100%. This is obvious for many reasons, but most essentially because nothing in reality exists as a monolith and monistic unity. Dialectical materialism upholds that everything, phenomena, and idea in our universe exists as a collection of internal and external relations. The working class, therefore, exists as an assemblage of internal and external relations. We're defined by external relation with the capitalist class, yes, but we're also defined by the internal relations between the real human beings which make up the working class, including all of the contradictions of bias, prejudice, social tension, false consciousness, etc. Maintaining our political standpoint means not straying into utopianism, idealism, and metaphysical monism, and other standpoints which contradict the core tenets of scientific socialism. 100%. Again, concrete analysis of the concrete condition. That, is Marxism, Marxist-Leninism in a nutshell. Actually looking at what is going on in the world, not where you think it might be in the future or where it was in the past. What is actually going on right here, right now, in the present world. Being pious to the people. The word pious here is not a great translation. The word Ho Chi Minh used in traditional Vietnamese, Hayu Thao, probably mispronouncing that, almost sure, which has a traditional meaning of filial piety, treating your parents with unconditional love. Ho Chi Minh co-opted this term, which has strong cultural connotations in Vietnamese society, to define the relationship which the revolutionary must have with the global proletariat. We must give the people our unconditional love, our utmost respect, our willingness to sacrifice and struggle for their well-being, protection, and liberation. One aspect that we can perhaps refer to as proletarian piety is listening to the people and being receptive of their suffering, which it seems like, these communists who, think the American flag is something to upheld or talk shit about landback as being, anti-communist. They're not being really receptive to the suffering of so many people within the United States and outside of it when they spout off this nonsense, right? One of the key points of victory, which enabled the Communist Party of Vietnam to win over the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese, was simply listening to them, understanding their struggle, and working to address their suffering directly. Which, again, the people I was just mentioning, they do the exact opposite, right? When the people were starving under Japanese fascist colonial rule, Communist Party broke into the imperial storehouse and distributed food to the people. In order to earn the trust and camaraderie of ethnic minorities, Ho Chi Minh went and lived among them for extended periods of time to learn their struggle and work to alleviate their suffering. Ho Chi Minh also identified the ways in which South Vietnam puppet government was using fascistic family values similar to those espoused by the Third Reich to subjugate women, divide the working class, and build sort of a fascist utopian moralism similar to what Michael Parenti describes in Black Shirts and Reds. That is a great book. Parenti has a lot of good books. That one, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, is also a really good one. Parenti's work, in general, is definitely worth checking out, in my opinion. Fascist doctrines stress monistic values: one people, one rule, one leader. People are no longer to be concerned with class division, but must see themselves as part of a harmonious whole, rich and poor as one, view that supports the economic status quo by cloaking the ongoing system of class oppression. It's like a workplace, like we're a team, like we're a family, like we had like your birthday cake, we gave you a birthday party one year, we're all one here, even though we're exploiting you on a continual basis day after day. Fascism's national chauvinism, racism, sexism, and patriarchal values also served a conservative class interest. Patriarchal ideology was linked to a conservative class ideology that saw all forms of social equality as threats to hierarchical control and privilege. Patriarchy buttressed this, the plutocracy. If women get out of line, what will happen to family? And if family goes, the entire social structure is threatened. What then will happen in the state and to the dominant classes' authority, privileges, and wealth? The fascists were big on what today is called family values. Fascist regime of the South Vietnam puppet government and the fascist dictator Ngo Dinh Diem emerged from reactionary elements of bourgeoisie Vietnamese society, which emerged the cultural conservatism of Confucianism and Catholicism with the brutality of fascism to preserve capitalist class relations. This ideology lined up nicely with the goals and political standpoints and Ngo's handlers in the USA, which they were undemocratically placed him in power to begin with in 1954, shortly after the Geneva Agreement, which officially divided North and South on the 17th parallel. So good. Again, like the marvel of fruit trees. Think about how many fruit trees we could plant in the United States if we defunded the military industrial complex, prison industrial complex. Literally billions of fucking fruit trees here and globally. I just think that would be awesome. Ho Chi Minh wrote and worked extensively to negate these contradictions because he knew that patriarchy and the oppression of women only sought to keep the working class weak and divided. He wrote countless articles about the liberation of women and helped build dual power structures like our Vietnam Women's Union, which is an important and powerful structure in Vietnamese society to this day. Uncle Ho didn't do any of these things like struggling for women's liberation and living among ethnic minorities to understand their struggles for the sake of optics, right? Like liberal idpol ideologists, but out of his piety for the people. He knew that listening to the concerns of the people was the only way to find a path forward, to know their material conditions intimately, to seek out the contradictions which divide the working class so as to find the best ways of negating them. But this wasn't just cold and cynical strategic calculus. He didn't view women and other marginalized people as a means to end of communist revolution. He truly cared about the suffering of the people. Ho Chi Minh wanted to liberate all humanity from all forms of oppression. His love for people would not allow him to stand for anything which caused misery and suffering if he could help it, which it seems like, these quote unquote communists who are talking shit about, landback, or again, espousing how the American flag or being an American patriot are some great thing. They don't really seem to understand or want to understand, or are incapable of understanding the misery and suffering that the positions that they're espousing cause, right? Ho Chi Minh came to this worldview through his own experience as a young, poor, itinerant worker during his travels around the world. He became politically active while living in Paris, and initially his primary concern was the liberation of his own people back home in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh attended various political meetings and found that only one group, the communists, would listen to the concerns about his homeland. As he wrote in The Path Which Led Me to Leninism, I'm going to have to check that book out. I bet that's awesome. The reason for joining the French Socialist Party was these ladies and gentlemen, as I called my comrades at that moment, has shown the sympathy towards me, towards the struggle of the oppressed peoples, but I understand neither what was a party, a trade union, or what was socialism or communism. Here we see Ho Chi Minh as a naive young revolutionist, unsure what path he would take. He came around to communism not because of a deep theoretical understanding of the nature of class conflict, nor an abiding hatred of capitalism, because the communists showed him proletarian piety. They listened to him. They were willing to engage him and listen to, his struggles, his worldview, etc. They welcomed him, listened to him, sympathized with his own immediate concerns about the racist and colonial subjugation of Vietnamese people, because of the writings of Lenin expressed the same thread of proletarian piety. Ho Chi Minh continued attending meetings of the French Socialist Party. The great topic of discussion at the time was whether the French Socialist Party should join the Second or Third International, which held competing ideological positions on various issues. Ho Chi Minh attending these discussions with one question in mind. What I wanted most to know, and this precisely was not debated in meetings, was which international sides with the people of colonial countries. Important question to ask, and right. Eventually, Ho Chi Minh came to see that it was Lenin's Third International which addressed this whole concern, which has nothing to do with capitalism. Through reading Lenin and learning about the Third International, Ho Chi Minh became a communist. Ho Chi Minh became convinced that through these interactions and discoveries that communism was not only sympathetic to the cause of decolonization of Vietnam, but that communism would be the key to decolonization of Vietnam. As Ho Chi Minh wrote, at first, patriotism, not yet communism, led me to have confidence in Lenin. The Third International, step by step, along the struggle by studying Marxist-Leninism, parallel with participating in practical activities. It's important, like applying theory to practice, right? Applying it to the real world. I gradually came upon the fact that only socialism and communism can liberate the oppressed nations, the working people throughout the world, from slavery. Can you imagine what would happen if the French communists, rather than welcoming Ho Chi Minh, listening to and sympathizing with his concerns, and demonstrating that they had an interest in decolonization, they instead dismissed Ho Chi Minh as non-Marxist for being concerned with colonialism, dismissed his objections to the brutal subjugation of Vietnamese along racial lines, a distraction, told them to focus on the working class and stop worrying about all that idpol. I shudder to think it would certainly at least have delayed the chain of events which led to the liberation of my people and the beginnings of our great socialist project, which we continue to build today. As Ho Chi Minh developed into a mature and well-read communist, his work began to focus on addressing the French workers directly, to extol upon them the nature of colonialism and how it hurt not just colonial subjects, but French workers as well. In various publications, Ho Chi Minh wrote passages like the following. Capitalism is a leech with one hose attached to the proletariat in the main country, another to the proletariat in the colony. If one wants to kill the animal, one has to cut both trunks at the same time. If only one is cut off, the other one will continue to suck the blood of the proletariat. The animal will continue to live, and the severed proboscis will grow back. All oppressed friends in the main country, the bourgeoisie in our country, has deceived you and used you as a tool to invade our country. Today, still, using the same insidious policy our country's bourgeoisie intends to use to suppress all of your efforts for self-liberation. In the face of capitalism and imperialism, our interests are united. Remember, Marx calls proletariats of all countries unite. Colonial union. Unfortunately, Ho Chi Minh made little headway with getting the French proletariat to materially fight on the behalf of it and collaborate with the colonial subjects of Vietnam and other French colonies. As Ho Chi Minh wrote somewhat bitterly in an article of El Himate, 1922, titled The Indifference of the Proletariat in the Main Country Towards the Colonies. Also very, very good. In his thesis on questions of the colonies, Lenin wrote, "Mission of the workers of the main country is to assist the liberation movements of the colonies." Or I would say even within the internal colonies that we have in the United States, right? In order to do that, workers in the main countries need to know exactly what the colonies are, know what happens in those colonies. They have to know that the colonial subjects are more miserable, 1,000 times more miserable than the workers in the main country. They have to know suffering their brother and sister proletarian workers in the colonies are bearing. In short, workers in the main country have to care about all the problems in the colonies, but sadly, the vast majority of the proletariat in the main country still think the colonies are just a sandy land with hot sun and some green coconuts, some people with different skin color. They quite simply do not care about us. Ho Chi Minh never stopped appealing to the French workers, and the French soldiers and mercenaries working for the French who supported a revolutionary struggle deserve much praise and reverence, but they were unfortunately vanishing few and far between. There are many other examples of communists recognizing that uniting the working class is a process of negating internal contradiction. Lenin saw secondary contradictions such as the peasant/industrial worker divide as chief concerns and worked tirelessly to find ways of negating this massive internal contradiction to build a united proletariat in Russia. And it's not just Marxist-Leninists who recognize the divisive nature of secondary contradictions and the harm they do to the working class. Anarchists like Nestor Makhno were intensely opposed to anti-Semitism. This is what Makhno wrote in 1927. All of the Jewish toilers of the Ukraine, as well as other Ukrainian toilers, are well aware the movement, which I was for years the leader, was a genuine revolutionary workers' movement. At no time did that movement seek to divide the practical organization of the deceived, exploited, and oppressed toilers on the grounds of race. Quite opposite, it aimed to unite them into a mighty revolutionary union capable of taking action against their oppressors, especially against the Dinkinists, who were dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semites. At no time did the movement make it its business to carry out pogroms against Jews, nor did it ever encourage it. What is more, the vanguard of Ukraine's Makhinist revolutionary movement contained many Jewish toilers. The Gulia Poili infantry regiment, for instance, had one company made up exclusively of 200 Jewish toilers. There were also 4-piece artillery battery, the gunners' defense units, which were all Jews commanded, included, and there were lots of Jewish toilers in the Makhinist movement who, for personal reasons, prefer to blend in with mixed revolutionary fighting unit. All right, I'm going to skip that. So it doesn't matter what your political tendency might happen to be. If you want to unite the working class, you must recognize that internal contradictions must be negated. Indeed, the process of uniting the working class is itself the process, yes, of negating internal contradictions which divide the working class. You simply can't negate such internal contradictions by ignoring them, which it seems like what these white, communists want to do, right? Secondary contradictions will manifest differently in different places and develop over time, but as long as they affect the working class, can't be united. Thus, contradictions like racism and colonialism aren't distractions. They're the internal social relations which define the working class in its current stage of development. Um, how are you going to dismantle racism, achieve land back, liberate women, etc.? Just a vague idea. What are the concrete steps? This is a misunderstanding dialectical process. It's like asking, how do you build communism? It's a question that can be answered with any universal prescription. Yes. All forms of oppression have dialectical continuity. It is true, as class reductionist utopians like to say, that class is not an identity. Class is an economic relation that presents what Marx terms the base of society. Many other forms of oppression, such as sexism, transphobia, etc., relate more to the superstructure, but that doesn't mean they exist in metaphysical isolation from the economic base. Marx knew that the base and superstructure of society have a strong dialectical relationship with each other. The base defines the superstructure, but the superstructure impacts the base. Clearly evident that capitalism defines the ways in which racism and sexism, other forms of identity oppression, manifest with capitalist societies. It's also quite clear that these forms of identity oppression also impact capitalism. So let's see how much more we got here. It was a long article. Hey, it's just long. And there we go. I'm going to end it with this one. Seen countless self-described communists display a spectrum of misunderstanding ranging from honest ignorance to aggressive reactionary and bigotry and chauvinism pertaining to philosophy of landback. Definitely see this to be true if you look at any of Luna's comments or tweets about the issue of landback, right? Some people have objections to the term landback itself, calling it a bourgeoisie construction which seeks to restore private land ownership to indigenous peoples. It's a gross misunderstanding of indigenous conceptions or the relations between humans and land. So let me give you a brief overview of indigenous land philosophy. First, let us recognize that indigenous people of the world are not a monolith. I can't speak for all indigenous people, nor could any indigenous individual. Land philosophy manifests in many different ways for different indigenous people. This relates to dialectical materialist concept, which in Vietnamese socialism we call private and common. Just like with communism, land back manifests in different ways for individual indigenous people's private aspects, to use the dialectical materialist terminology of Vietnamese socialism, but there are also commonalities which exist across most indigenous movements. As Hawaiian native Silver Spook explains, Hawaiians have a concept of Aina, which they conceive of the land as mother. There's Fanon. Silver Spook explains that Aina means the balanced ecology of Mother Earth with the thriving of the people. Indigenous people were technologically, politically, economically advanced and also balanced the ecology of Aina, Hawaiian for Earth, with thriving of people. We didn't excel at mass killing and lying, unlike the colonizer, whose noble savage myth is racist and historically incorrect. Native Hawaiians are hardly the only indigenous people to have this kind of philosophy. Common land ownership, as Julian Brave Noise Cat writes, ingrained in each Salish community then is the idea even older than our indigenous languages that the people are of the land and the land is of the people. These kindred spirits are alive and inseparable. Admittedly, Noise Cat is not a Marxist. Marx, Lenin, and Mao are dismissed by Noise Cat as no longer offering a size sharp enough to fell the stalks of capitalism. On this point, we might differ, but Noise Cat's philosophical description of indigenous conception of land line up with the conversation I've had with indigenous comrades from all over the world. We don't need to agree about everything to agree that the communists were neither the first nor the only people in history to conceive a world which land and means of production are held in common. Agree. In this incredible video by Twin Rabbit, where I told the story of how indigenous philosophy served as the very foundation for many of the ideas Marx and Engels and the various founders of various socialist philosophies of the West, even the liberal democracy of the USA, which was formed based on the Iroquois Federation, right? To erase the history of indigenous people as progenitors of many of the philosophical concepts which form Western socialism, including common ownership, And by erasing the anti-capitalist struggle indigenous people live and breathe today, you're helping the bourgeoisie recuperate these movements and hindering the negation of these internal contradictions, which has plagued the working class since the foundation of capitalism. Three general goals of landback: sovereignty, self-determination, autonomy, and an end to all colonial suppression; land rights, restoration of land which was stolen so indigenous people can restore our cultures, economic standing, ways of life. How much land do they want to kick everyone out? I'll answer this later. Ecology, the protection of land and the end of destructive practices which are irrevocably harming a planetary ecosystem. This is the highest priority for almost every indigenous person I've ever talked to, including myself. Communist Manifesto, another good read by Marx. It's not super long either. Practical application of the principles will depend, as a manifesto it says, everyone at all times on the historical conditions of the time being existing. Oh, I'll link this down below, but like I've been reading that article for very, very long time. One sec. Have you had a Asian pear before? If so, did you like it?